This is the VOA Special English Technology Report. A labor group has begun investigating working conditions at the Chinese factories where many Apple products are made. Apple officials ordered the investigation after the New York Times described poor working conditions at the factories. The Foxconn Technology Group owns the manufacturing plants in Shenzhen, Chengdu, and Zhengzhou. Angela Cornell is a professor at the Cornell Law School in Ithaca, New York. She says many issues were raised last year after a number of suicides at the Foxconn factories. One issue is the number of hours that employees are required to work. Other concerns involve pay, living conditions, and even reports of violence against workers. The New York Times reported that employees sometimes worked 7 days a week. The newspaper said some stood so long that they had trouble walking. Widespread criticism of Apple followed publication of those reports. Mark Shields organized a campaign calling for better working conditions. Workers' lives are really hard and really severe. And there's terrible stories about people losing the use of their hands because of horrible, repetitive motion injuries. And suicide rates that are so high that they have got to hang nets off the sides of the buildings to prevent workers from killing themselves. Professor Cornell says the conditions at the Foxconn factories had to have been really bad. Just imagine how dire the working conditions would have had to be for those workers to sacrifice their lives. Professor Cornell says even Apple's own reports noted issues at some of its factories. These included involuntary labor and underage labor. These are important issues. The involuntary laborers are indentured migrant workers, and that is a crucially important issue. I mean, that's basically slave labor. More than 200,000 people have joined Mark Shields' campaign for better working conditions. The American admits he loves his Apple products, but he says he wants them to be made without human suffering. In related developments, Foxconn said it was raising the pay of its workers in China for the third time since 2010. And Apple asked the Fair Labor Association to investigate conditions at the Foxconn factories. Apple recently joined that association. The nonprofit group was established in 1999 to investigate working conditions around the world. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. Get more news and learn English at voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Technology Report. A top-level domain is the part of an internet address after the dot. The most common of what are called generic top-level domains are .com, .net, and .org. There are 22 generic top-level domain names currently available. But get ready for many, many more. The international organization that controls these names will begin accepting applications for new ones in January. This will open the door to just about anything. Brad White is with ICANN, the International Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. He says, what we're talking about doing with the new generic top-level domain program is blowing the lid off that ceiling of 22. The interest is there to expand that. We no longer have to keep this to 22. It can be almost any word combination. It can be in non-Latin characters, which is extremely important if you happen to speak Russian because of the Cyrillic alphabet, or Arabic, or Chinese. ICANN officials met in October in Dakar, Senegal. Brad White says they discussed the new program for what are known as GTLDs. This marks one of the biggest changes in the Internet's domain name system, the addressing system of the Internet that has ever occurred. We want to make sure that the process of getting these GTLDs into the Internet's root is methodical, careful, and thoughtful. Anyone can apply, including businesses, governments, and individuals. The cost of a new name? $185,000. Mr. White says that's the cost that we've determined that is necessary to make sure that the applicant has the technical savvy to run an Internet registry, that there is no intellectual property or trademark problems, so on and so forth. But that $185,000 is minuscule compared to the cost of actually operating an Internet registry. In Dakar, ICANN passed a resolution to consider creating a support system to help rising economies with limited financial resources. For example, ICANN says Africa represented less than 12% of Internet growth worldwide in the last 10 years. But Mr. White says that is slowly beginning to change. ICANN will accept applications from January 12th to April 12th. It could take up to a year for new names to become active. ICANN says it will approve no more than 1,000 new generic top-level domains each year. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Technology Report in Special English. Apple's new iPhone 5 is selling well in the Gaza Strip, although people are paying high prices there. The new phone reached parts of the Gaza Strip through tunnels. They were smuggled into Gaza before the iPhone 5 went on sale in Israel. Residents of Gaza are buying the smartphones for almost double the cost in the United States. The price of the phones has been raised by middlemen who bring them from Dubai through tunnels linking Gaza with Egypt. The iPhone 5 will not be available until December from mobile operators in Israel. Israel and Egypt have put in place a partial blockade of Gaza to prevent the flow of arms and weapons. But Apple's smartphones have been available for weeks in the Gaza Strip. Reuters reports the phones were on display recently in 3 independent mobile technology stores in downtown Gaza City. Prices for the phones go from about $1,170 for the 16 gigabyte model to $1,480 for the 64 gigabyte version. Apple launched the iPhone 5 last month. In the United States, the 16 gigabyte version sells for about $650, while the 64 gigabyte version costs about $850. Apple does not have an official store in Gaza, the Islamist Hamas leadership is in conflict with Israel. An Israeli newspaper reported recently that the iPhone 5's new Apple Maps application does not list Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Israel considers Jerusalem its capital. For Palestinians living in Gaza, costs for all kinds of imports are inflated by middlemen and smugglers. Hamas adds sales tax at its end of the supply chain. But this has not stopped demand for the popular smartphones in the territory. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Pursuit.
This is the VOA Special English Technology Report. If you could build a time machine, what would it look like? Maybe it should look like a telescope. American scientists are building a space telescope that they hope will look back over distance and time to show the universe close to its beginning. But this distant past will mainly be seen in infrared light, which telescopes and cameras can see, but not the human eye. The American Space Agency, NASA, is now building the largest space telescope ever. The James Webb Space Telescope is named after NASA's second director. It will have a mirror 7 times the size of the one on the Hubble Space Telescope. The mirror is 6.5 meters wide, made of lightweight beryllium and covered in gold. But it will mainly study the universe in infrared light. We usually experience infrared light as heat. But if you have ever used a TV remote control, you know there are many uses for it. The James Webb Space Telescope is a complex engineering project. It will be huge, about the size of a passenger jet, and it will have to be super cooled. Because the telescope studies infrared heat, its mirror must be kept very close to absolute zero. That is minus 273 degrees Celsius. NASA is building the Webb telescope at the Goddard Space Center outside Washington. The agency hopes to launch it in 2014. Jonathan Gardner is a project scientist for the telescope. We asked him how the device can look back in time. He says, "We can see back in time because the light takes time to get from there to here. So as we look further and further away, it takes longer and longer for the light to get from where it's emitted to here. And we can actually see backwards in time. And if you look far enough, you start to approach the event that scientists believe gave birth to everything." As Jonathan Gardner puts it, we're looking at the universe when it was much younger. And we're looking back most of the way to the Big Bang. Jonathan Gardner says any astronomer at any university in any country can write a proposal for what they want to do with the telescope. The James Webb Space Telescope should help scientists learn how the first galaxies formed and what they looked like. It may even show things scientists never predicted. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Pursuti. You can watch a video about the James Webb Space Telescope and download an MP3 of the story at voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Technology Report. Last time, we told you about efforts by Microsoft to stop the cybercrime operation known as Zeus. Zeus hackers use a network of infected computers known as botnets to steal personal information from computer users. On March 23rd, officials seized computer servers in 2 states, Pennsylvania and Illinois. The servers were said to be operating some of the worst known Zeus botnets. Richard Boscovich is with the Digital Crimes Unit at Microsoft. He says the operators of the servers did not know they were linked to cybercrime. He says the hosting providers in and of themselves are not necessarily in cahoots with the criminals. Zeus botnets are positioned all over the world. Mr. Boscovich says they act as command and control centers for the infected computers. It's not just one botnet, but probably hundreds of different botnets that come from this particular code base, he says. And he says the Zeus botnets are not easy to identify. These command and control centers are constantly moving, so it takes a lot of effort to be able to identify where they were or where they are and where they are going to be. Microsoft says it is studying information gathered from the servers that were seized. It hopes to gather more evidence against the unidentified Zeus operators. It also hopes to identify and notify the more than 13 million computer users that have been infected with the Zeus malware. Mr. Boscovich says there are many things that users can and should do to protect themselves from harmful software programs. At the very least, he says, they should be using legitimate software that has been purchased from creditable providers. And he says every computer must have current antivirus software. Most of all, Mr. Boscovich says computer users must be careful about emails. In his words, the bad guys are extremely adept at sending emails that appear to be from friends, from family members, or from banks or companies. Microsoft is not alone in targeting botnets. Security experts from CrowdStrike, Dell SecureWorks, and other companies took down a large botnet known as Kellyhouse in March. As quickly as Kellyhouse was stopped, researchers say cybercriminals began working to build another botnet. Also, the European Union announced steps to fight cybercrime. These include plans to establish a new cybercrimes center in The Hague. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. For more about the Zeus botnets, go to voaspecialenglish.com.
I'm Carolyn Persuti with the VOA Special English Technology Report. A powerful earthquake struck the northeastern coast of Japan at 2:46 p.m. local time on March 11th. Japan's meteorological agency released its first tsunami warnings just 3 minutes later. The country has one of the best earthquake early warning systems in the world. There are more than 4,000 seismic intensity meters in place throughout Japan to measure earthquake activity. These meters provide information within 2 minutes of an earthquake happening. Information about the strength and the center of the earthquake can be learned within 3 minutes. Kostas Sinalakis is a tsunami expert with the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. He said
Japan is one of the most well-prepared countries on earth in terms of tsunami warning. He said they had a warning. I think what went wrong is that they had not anticipated the size of this event. He said there are two reasons for this. Japan has not had any event anywhere near as big as this one in the last 150 years. And scientists had not expected such a large earthquake happening off the coast of Japan. The 9.0 magnitude earthquake was the fourth most powerful earthquake ever recorded worldwide. It was also the worst earthquake ever to hit Japan. The tsunami waves that followed were reported to have reached as high as 13 meters in some areas. Kostas Sinolakis said Japan's concrete seawalls were not built to handle such high waves. He said the concrete seawalls in many places in Japan are about 10 meters. That's about 33 feet. In Sendai, they were about 3 meters. That's about 10 feet. So that shows you that at least in that area, they were not expecting such a sizable wave. A tsunami wave can travel as fast as 800 kilometers per hour. To get to higher ground, people would often have to travel for many kilometers. This can take more time than a fast-traveling tsunami will permit. This is especially true in cases like Japan, where the center of the earthquake struck so close to the coastline. The tsunami waves followed almost immediately. Experts say early warning systems will continue to be limited by these facts until earthquakes and tsunamis can be predicted. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Prasuti.
This is the VOA Special English Development Report. Humanitarian aid groups have promised to continue their work in Afghanistan after militants murdered 10 medical aid workers August 5th. Officials say the 7 men and 3 women worked for the Christian aid group International Assistance Mission. They were returning to Kabul after a trip to Nuristan province to provide medical care and supplies. Those killed were 6 Americans, 1 German, 1 Briton, and 2 Afghans. The Taliban claimed responsibility for the attack. It accused the aid workers of being spies and spreading Christianity. Violence against aid workers has increased in recent years, even though international laws are supposed to protect them. 17 aid workers were killed in the first half of this year in Afghanistan. 19 others were kidnapped. In Pakistan, 7 aid workers from the Christian group World Vision were killed during an attack on their office in March. Officials believe militants were responsible for the attack. The Humanitarian Policy Group has been studying violence against aid workers for more than 10 years. The group released its latest report on the issue last year. Abby Stoddard works with the international research group Humanitarian Outcomes. She helped write the policy group report. The report says that in 2008, 260 humanitarian aid workers were killed, kidnapped, or seriously injured in violent attacks. This was the highest number of incidents since the group began doing the research 12 years ago. Mrs. Stoddard says more than 60% of the incidents took place in 3 countries. She said there has been an increase in major attacks against aid workers. But this has been driven by the extremely violent environments in Afghanistan, Somalia, and Sudan, especially the Darfur area of Sudan. Sri Lanka, Chad, Iraq, and Pakistan also had many cases of violence against aid workers. Abby Stoddard says ongoing conflicts in the countries increase the risk of violence against aid workers. Mrs. Stoddard called the recent murders in Afghanistan horrific, but she said they are not uncommon. She says incidents involving nationals instead of foreigners do not get the same level of attention. And that's the VOA Special English Development Report. You can comment on this report at our website, voaspecialenglish.com. This is the VOA Special English Technology Report. Have you ever heard of Joseph Kony? Chances are you have at least heard about a video called Kony 2012. An American nonprofit group posted it on YouTube in early March. The half-hour video quickly went viral with tens of millions of views. The group Invisible Children created Kony 2012 to bring attention to Joseph Kony and his Lord's Resistance Army in Central Africa. In the video, Jason Russell from Invisible Children says, "For 26 years, Kony has been kidnapping children into his rebel group, the LRA, turning the girls into sex slaves and the boys into child soldiers." The group hopes the video will lead to his capture before the end of the year. Many people praise Kony 2012 for bringing attention to the issue, but others have criticized it and accused the creators of seeking financial gain. Critics say the way some of the information is presented may be misleading. Louisa Lombard is a graduate student in Duke University's Department of Cultural Anthropology. Ms. Lombard has studied conflict and policy in Africa. She says much of the information presented in the video is old. She says viewers get the impression that this is a northern Ugandan problem. In fact, she says, the LRA has not been operating in northern Uganda for years. They moved first to South Sudan, then on to the Democratic Republic of Congo and into the Central African Republic. Where they are now is debatable, Ms. Lombard says. The Ugandan government had a similar reaction to the video. In a statement, the government thanked the international community for its interest in Joseph Kony and the LRA, but it made clear that the group had not been active in Uganda since 2006. Uganda says the LRA is no longer a major threat and that the group now has less than 300 members. Paul Levinson is a professor of communication and media studies at Fordham University in New York. He says the important thing about the video is that it brings attention to Joseph Kony and the LRA. In his words, if it's slightly off in a fact or two, that's a very, very minor criticism. On March 15th, Jason Russell was hospitalized after San Diego police found him in his underwear following reports that he had been naked and screaming in the streets. The head of Invisible Children said the filmmaker was suffering from exhaustion, dehydration, and malnutrition. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. For more technology news, for people learning English, go to voaspecialenglish.com.